Today we're going to be doing a water pump replacement on a 96 Impala. This one is bone stock, so it still has the air pump, the factory air intake, etc. The reason we're replacing this water pump, the bearing weep hole is leaking. So when that happens, what it generally does is it gets the belt wet, and it makes you think that you're actually losing your power steering because you're going to have belt slippage right around that pulley, and you're actually draining coolant. You're not losing any power steering fluid. So look at the floor over here. This is how much coolant he was leaking out of this car, and while he was driving, the coolant leak got worse, and it just drenched the belt in coolant, making his power steering pump slip because the back of the belt is slipping on that smooth pulley. So, and this was just because the water pump was draining right on top of the belt here. So we're going to change the pump and get this thing back to normal operating condition, and he'll be good to go. First thing you want to do is remove the home plate. It's a 13 millimeter. Then you'll need a flathead screwdriver for the clamp. Once that's unbolted, you set it aside. You will go ahead and disconnect the air temperature sensor, tuck it out of the way, remove the vent hose elbow for the OptiSpark, disconnect the clamp on the throttle body, and you can disconnect the other side that's attached to the mass airflow sensor. And that's really all you need to remove to have access to the water pump and surrounding areas, because we are going to show you how to remove the air pump. You have to remove the air pump and its bracket in order to get the water pump off, because the rightmost stud, the rightmost bolt on the water pump is actually a stud, and that stud is one of two bolts that's holding the bracket that the air pump is mounted to. Now, one of the first steps to removing the air pump is go ahead and remove this hose. It should just slide right off. And you also have this smaller hose here, which you can go from the top, take a flathead screwdriver, pry it on each side, and that'll pop off as well. Up here, you have this little elbow. Be very, very careful about removing this elbow. You do not want to break this valve here, this little check valve that's right here. So break the rubber loose and pry it off. Just do very gently, like that. Set this over here. I like to tuck it underneath the brake hose here, and then you can pry this off of this U-pipe here, like so. Now you have access. You have three 10 millimeter bolts that hold the air pump to its bracket, and on the bottom here of the air pump you have a little tab that you pull off like that, and then you need to pull off the power cord for the air pump. Now the air pump is free to be unbolted. You have a bolt up top here, you have one here, and one on the bottom. Now these are all 10 millimeter bolts, so you'll need a 6-inch or 9-inch extension. You don't have to, if you're using a regular ratchet, you can use a 1/4-inch drive. They're not on there very tight. I'm going to get the top bolt first. They are pretty long. So you get the one here in the middle. Sometimes It has these rubber grommets on each side. Like there's one on the top here as well. And sometimes they will just come out like that. If they do and they fall, just find them, pick them up and put them back, put them with each screw, and you'll be good. Now we have the last one at the bottom. Okay. So, and look at that. The air pump came out completely. And now you can see the bracket here, which you have one bolt here. The other bolt is hidden behind these two, the two center spark plug wire boots off the Opti. So these two need to be removed to have access to the other bolt for the bracket that's right back here. The other thing we're going to have to remove off the bracket, there's a bolt in the back that holds a tab that holds on the spark plug wire clamp. So you just want to slide that off so it's no longer attached to the back of this bracket. The top bolt here is a 9/16. I'm using an impact, and that came right out. So that one's done. Now I have to undo the two middle spark plug wire from the Opti. I have to take these off the Opti in order to access the bolt that's behind it under there. So I'm using needle nose, and you don't want to grab up here, you want to grab back here. That's one. I'm going to put that toward the top because that's the upper. I'm going to try and get that over here. And that one I can just lay it down so I know that's on the bottom, so there's no confusion. Okay. So, and that's also a 9/16. That came right out as well. So now that both bolts are out, now I should be able to pull this bracket. Well, the only thing left that's holding it in is the nut here, which is also a 9/16. So let me go ahead and get that. Actually, I need a shorter extension. So before we take off the nut that's holding the bracket in place, we need to go ahead and remove the temperature sensor wire. Unplug it from the front, just like that. Set it aside. And the nut that is holding this thing together still is a 9/16. That's on the very side of the water pump. So now that the nut is removed, now we should be able to slide this straight off. Yeah, it'll come off. Oh yes, it's still attached to this hose. So, this off here, like that. And now this bracket, you can just bend it out of the way because there's a tab that it's welded to that's connected to this U-pipe. So you can just bend the tab and get it out of the way. So now you have access to the stud that's holding the water pump on this side. So now we're going to drain the coolant, and then we will be able to remove the hoses properly. Now you can purchase these hose clamps from just about any parts house, but they come in real handy so you're not losing all your coolant when you drain it. So I've got them on the upper and lower radiator hose, and I got it on the lower heater hose. This upper one I'm not worried about because as soon as I undo it, I'm just going to raise it up, and gravity will take place and allow it to drain out the rest of the way. So now we're going to get the bottom bolt, the bottom right bolt here, which is also a 9/16. As soon as you pull this out, you're going to start losing the coolant. And it'll come out real nice, just like that. Now if if you want to see even more. Just take the cap off. All you're going to lose is the coolant that's either in this tank and in the block. That's it. The radiator is sealed off. So just removing that one lower right hand bolt from the water pump is the best way to drain it before you need to remove the pump. So now we've got it drained for the most part. So I've already undone the clamps for the upper and lower radiator hose. We're also going to do a throttle body bypass on this. Now the one thing about these is that this was designed for cars that are being sold in the north, which runs engine coolant through the throttle body before it gets back to the tank. Now the only issue with that is these cars are getting older, and unfortunately, you know, so are the gaskets. So as they get older, and if they've never been changed, the gasket material in here could actually spring a leak, basically shoving engine coolant down the throat of the intake manifold. So we're going to take this hose, shorten it, and it's going to go right down this side, straight to the pipe that this is originally connected to. There's a 90-degree elbow over here where that coolant comes in here into the throttle body, comes out here back to the tank. So we're going to remove this hose, shorten this hose, and run it directly to this pipe right here. Sometimes these hoses will be on there so long you need to use like a 90-degree dental pick to break it loose from the steel, so you can get it in there, turn it 90 degrees, and all you're looking to do is just break the rubber apart from the steel. Pull the pick, just drain whatever's on the top, and you can fold it out a little bit. And yes, I hate spring clamps. Okay, now there is a trick for this bottom one, because it is going to drain a little bit when you take it out. So move the clamp. When you pull it off, don't take it off all the way. Get it right to the edge. Have the bottom of the hose pointing right at the bucket, so that way you're not spilling it all over the driveway. You're basically targeting to bring it down. Okay, and that's done. Out of the way. To remove the belt with a stock tensioner, you need a 13 millimeter. So we're going to do that next. So 13 millimeter, regular 3/8 ratchet. The reason we're taking the belt off is because we're going to replace the belt while we're here, because this one has a few little frays on it, like this. So it's an older belt, and we want to go ahead and replace it. So we're going to be using the same 9/16 to remove the rest of the bolts from the water pump. And you have the stud on this side. So I've already taken one out, so there's the stud which we had to remove the air pump bracket to access. The upper, lower left, for left and center left. Now that you have these, the water pump is clear to come out. Now it's going to be stuck on there, so it may take a little convincing because this one is stuck. So I'm going to get a little pry bar, and right over here you see there's a guide pin right there. See that? There's a little guide pin on this side and on this side over here, which is going to be hard to see, but there's a guide pin right there. So that's what's holding it aligned with the engine block. But that's a good place we can pry behind the aluminum to pull off the water pump. I'm going to use this little fork, which is usually for pins, and just prying up behind that pin. That got it loose, so that broke the seal. Now you can wiggle it. Got to break the seal on both sides, because sometimes you can get a lot of rust on these pins, which will try to prevent it from coming out all the way. So sometimes you may need a little help, like this. Now be careful to avoid the OptiSpark connector and the coil wire when you're removing the water pump. Okay. Here. Now that the water pump's removed, this is the weep hole. When the bearing seal starts to fail, coolant is going to leak out of this hole right onto your belt and your OptiSpark. So as soon as that happens, you got to replace the pump. Or you can convert to electric. Electric pumps, they mount right here on this faceplate. So you remove these 6 bolts, you mount an electric pump, and you actually punch out the factory impeller, and it comes with a freeze plug that plugs that weep hole. So you would no longer have that worry if you converted to electric. But this fella here, he wants to keep it stock. So we're going to keep it stock. We do need to remove the thermostat out of here, and that is I believe an 8mm. Double check. Yep, 8mm. So now that the thermostat housing bolts are loose, we're going to go ahead and keep the thermostat. 9 times out of 10 you'd want to buy a new one, but I don't think this one is very old, and it's not. So the seal on it's still really good. So as long as I can get this out of here without damaging anything like that, it'll work just fine. So we're keeping this thermostat. We're going to install it on the new water pump. The one other thing we're going to have to remove off this pump is the temperature sensor. So we will remove this, and I'm not sure what size socket that is, but you want to use a thin wall. Is it a 3/4? That's a 3/4. So that's what we're going to use to remove the temperature sensor here. The only thing with this is you want to clean these threads before you install it on the new water pump. So one of the things we're going to have to do is scrape off the gasket material off the engine block before we install a new pump. So you can use a gasket scraper or a razor blade. I'm using a razor blade, and you just want to scrape off as much as you can by hand to get the big chunks off, because you do not want this being duplicated, or like having 2 gaskets stuck on top of each other, because that can leak easily. So you just want to get all this old stuff off. Make sure you try to keep the channel in the block clean and clear. We are going to go over this with a wire brush on a drill to really clean it up. I'm just getting the bulky stuff off. So just remember to get both sides as clean as possible. Another thing we're going to do is we're going to fold a regular shop towel fold it into thirds, and one over, and you roll it, and roll it pretty tight. Because what we're going to do is we are going to slide this into the block. Actually, I'm sorry, I need to cut this in half first, so let me do that. So take one half, put it in the upper hole. This is before you do the wire brush on the drill. Take the other, stick it in the bottom hole, get it just past level. This way, any debris is not going to go in the engine block. So you're going to do that on both sides, and then you can break out the wire brush on a drill, and that'll clean up the engine block surface really nice. So now, after using the wire wheel on the drill, we managed to clean up the engine block surface, the mating surface to the water pump on the engine block, really clean. Got rid of all the old gasket material, and this is, see, those blue shop towels are now really dirty. That's because all the debris. We didn't want any of that flying in the block. So now it's all there. We can spray this side down a little bit with some brake parts cleaner. We'll do the same thing to the other side, and then we'll be ready to reinstall the water pump. So now we got both sides clean, both the driver and the passenger side mating surfaces on the engine block clean, ready to receive a water pump. Now this drive sleeve is still tight. It's not wobbling back here, so we're going to leave that alone. In a lot of cases we would change out the O-ring that sits there, but I'm just going to clean up around this for the time being with a little brake parts cleaner. It'll dry instantly, so I'm not worried about that. So, and this was not leaking oil either. If it was leaking oil, we would be replacing this seal, but it's not leaking oil, so we're going to leave it alone. So let's go over to the water pump and prep it for installation. Okay, now the water pump does come with its own gaskets, which one goes here, the other one goes here. Now you can install these dry if you like. However, I always like to put a thin layer of ultra black RTV, and I mean just a really thin layer on here, just to make it stick to the water pump, so that way as I'm installing it, the gasket's not going to come loose or get out of place, so that when I put the screws in, it's not going to drill through the gasket material or just become misaligned to where it doesn't seal up at all. So we're going to do that. Fresh RTV, and I'm just going to put a little dab on a couple of spots for this one. And like I said, just a real very thin layer. You just want to coat the metal. That's all, just coat the metal. Because if you put too thick of a layer on here, it's going to swell in when you torque it down, and it's going to get in the passageway for the coolant, and you don't want that to happen. So that's why you just do a very, very, very thin layer. You just want to cover the metal just to get the gasket to stick. Make sure there's nothing in the passages like that. So align the holes, let that sit. Like so. We go on to the next one. Let's get that, just a little dab here. Come on. Dab, dab. Okay. Any excess that you have, just take it, just wipe it off. Your finger. And take the gasket. Get it on there. Make sure you clear the bolt holes. Make sure they're aligned. Let it sit and stick for a moment before you install it. Now the thermostat, we're going to install the thermostat after we put the water pump on the engine. So give that about 5 minutes to kind of semi-solidify a little bit, and then we'll put it on the engine. So ensuring that the gaskets stay in line, I slid in the 2 upper bolts, so they're going to stay on there as I maneuver this thing around the plug and the Opti harness. And you just need them as a guide a little bit, so now you just got to get them lined up. Oh, wait a second. What's going on? I know what's going on. I got to turn the water pump because the sleeve is not going, the drive pin is not going in the sleeve all the way. So let's try this again. See if it goes in now. And will it? Yep, just like that. So now I can get them started, get the rest of them bolted in, and torque it back up. So now that we got the water pump all mounted and torqued, I'm going to take the thermostat, put it right there. Take the thermostat housing, lay it on top. The rubber O-ring for the thermostat is the seal, so there is no additional gasket for this. So as soon as the housing starts to move, you want to snug down the other bolt so the seal sits evenly. Alright, so now that it's at that point, it does not need to be super tight. You just want to do it until the bolt stops, like that, and then just give it one little snug, and that's it. Now, temperature sensor, plug into the new, and that is a 3/4 deep socket. There we go. So now that that's done, we can actually reattach the hoses, and we still need to take care of the throttle body bypass for this before we connect this final hose here. But the water pump is installed. So now you need to put everything back, like this bracket here, which you pick it up and slide it back onto the stud. You want to do that before you use the hardware mounts that you removed earlier. So like that. And that'll keep it in place while you bolt it back up to the block. Okay, so now that we got the bracket back on, you want to push it as much as you can, get this nut started on that stud. So that way it'll hold the bracket in place. And you can push it with your other hand to get it almost all the way up against the block. So you have a little bit of playroom to realign these bolts to the block. I'm sorry, I already had that one in there. So you get this one started. You don't get it all the way in and snug, you just get it started. And you take the other one and you get that one started as well. So now that they're started, now you can use the impact. switch out to the shorter extension. For that one last nut. There you go. And now the air pump bracket is reinstalled, so you can reattach the spark plug wires back to the OptiSpark. Remember, the one that we let hang low was the one for the bottom, and the one that we tucked away up top was for the upper. Make sure you get at least 2 clicks on each one. Now you can reinstall the air pump. This, where's that tab? Spark plug wire tab. We'll snap that back on. That's good to go. This piece here, which is for this guy. Plug that back in and get him out of the way. So now we have room for the air pump. Now, remember the rubber bushings? Well, they go on like this. So if any of them came off, just press them back onto the air pump prior, because what happens is the bolts will stick to the rubber here. See, that's why they pop off. So just take them, stick them back on, and remember it goes this way. And we have this one up top that we get started, which is behind this wire harness, which wire harnesses do love to give you away. So just need to get them threaded. Okay, so now they're threaded. We can use the 10mm. Let's get it back on. Remember, they were long bolts, so they do not need to be torqued very much because you are drilling a fine thread bolt into an aluminum housing. So now that that's back on, you can go ahead and reattach that and this. The lower one here first, and the upper. Get them all clamped up. This guy is absolutely last since we're modifying it. So. Okay, so we have all those hoses reconnected to the water pump. I can actually take these clamps off now. Okay, so now we reattach the plumbing for the air pump here. We'll get all that back together, and then we'll put a new belt on it, top it off with coolant, and then we're good to go. So the throttle body bypass, we cut off the one elbow piece of hose here. You can leave it open, and we ran the hose along here. We cut it a little shorter. We raised the end of this tube up, pointing it up a little bit, and we hose clamped it to that hose, and that is your throttle body bypass. So you can cap these off with some regular rubber caps, which we will do at a future date. So with that being completed and the water pump being reinstalled, now we can finish putting everything back on. So we had to unplug the throttle position sensor. That's not it, this is it, sorry. We also had to unplug the idle air control valve here to get the wire harness out of the way so we would not damage it. So that's done. This is for the air temperature sensor, it goes on the elbow. So let's get the intake back on, and then we will top it off with coolant and get a new belt on it. So everything's reattached. Slide that back in, connects to that tab right there. Put that back on, reconnect this. This goes here. So we need the screwdriver so we can tighten this up. The home plate. Make sure these are good and tight so you do not have any air leaks for the intake. Okay, so now we are just ready for a new serpentine belt. We'll go ahead and top off the coolant, bleed it out, and then we're finished.